Governor Sarah Thompson had just wrapped up a long but productive week at an international conference focused on criminal justice reform. The event was held in a bustling European city, and she had spent hours listening to experts, sharing her own experiences and brainstorming solutions to make policing fairer and more accountable. Exhausted but inspired, she boarded her flight back home, ready to implement some of the ideas she'd gathered. Little did she know that her journey would take a dramatic turn before she even stepped out of the airport. As the plane descended into her hometown, Governor Thompson felt a sense of relief wash over her. She loved traveling for work, but nothing compared to coming back home. Her state wasn't perfect, it had its share of problems, but it was where her heart belonged. After collecting her small carry-on bag from the overhead compartment, she joined the line of passengers exiting the aircraft. Dressed casually in jeans, a blazer, and comfortable sneakers, she blended in with the crowd. No one gave her a second glance as she made her way through the terminal. The airport was alive with activity. Families reunited after long separations. Business travelers rushed to catch connecting flights, and tourists excitedly snapped photos of the bustling concourse. Governor Thompson walked briskly toward baggage claim, eager to get home and rest. But as she approached the escalator leading to the lower level, something unusual caught her attention. Two police officers stood nearby, their eyes scanning the crowd intently. They looked young, likely rookies, and seemed tense, as though they were searching for someone specific. At first, Governor Thompson didn't think much of it. Police presence at airports was common, especially given heightened security measures these days. But then, one of the officers locked eyes with her. His expression shifted from casual observation to sharp focus. He whispered something to his partner, and both men began walking in her direction. A knot formed in her stomach. Something about this felt off. "Ma'am," the taller officer said, stepping directly into her path. His voice was firm, almost aggressive. "Can I see your ID, please?" Governor Thompson stopped in her tracks, surprised by the sudden demand. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone polite but confused. "Is there a problem?" "We need to see your identification," the second officer repeated, his hand resting near the holster of his gun. His stance was rigid, his demeanor unwelcoming. She hesitated for a moment, unsure why they were singling her out. Still, she complied, reaching into her purse to retrieve her wallet. "I'm not sure what this is about," she said calmly, handing over her driver's license. "But here you go." The officers examined the ID closely, exchanging glances with each other. Their expressions darkened, and Governor Thompson could feel her unease growing. "This says you're the governor," the taller officer finally muttered, skepticism dripping from his voice. "Are you really her?" "Yes, I am," she replied, trying to keep her tone steady despite the absurdity of the question. "Why are you asking? Is there some kind of issue?" Instead of answering, the officers exchanged another look, this one filled with uncertainty. For a brief moment, Governor Thompson thought they might apologize and let her go. But instead, the shorter officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "We're going to have to detain you," he said flatly. Her heart sank. "Detain me? On what grounds?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly. "You can't do this. I'm telling you, I'm the governor." But the officers weren't listening. Whether it was poor training, racial bias, or a combination of both, they ignored her protests entirely. Without another word, they grabbed her arms and forced them behind her back, snapping the cold metal cuffs around her wrists. Governor Thompson gasped in shock and pain, her mind racing. How could this be happening? Why weren't they checking her credentials properly? Didn't they recognize her name? Passengers passing by slowed down, staring in disbelief. Some whipped out their phones to record the scene, whispering among themselves. Governor Thompson felt humiliated, her dignity stripped away in front of strangers. She tried to remain composed, reminding herself that she was a leader, a role model. But it was hard when fear and anger bubbled inside her. As the officers led her toward a private area near the security checkpoint, she noticed a man in the crowd pointing at her and shouting, "That's the governor! That's Sarah Thompson!" His voice carried across the terminal, drawing even more attention. Other passengers began murmuring, their faces showing a mix of confusion and outrage. For the officers, this was the moment everything started to unravel. One of them froze mid-step, his grip on Governor Thompson loosening slightly. The other glanced nervously at his partner, clearly realizing they might have made a colossal mistake. Yet neither of them immediately released her. Instead, they stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. Meanwhile, Governor Thompson took a deep breath, gathering her composure. She knew this incident was bigger than her personal embarrassment. It was a reflection of larger systemic issues she had dedicated her career to addressing. As the reality of the situation sank in for everyone involved, the tension in the air grew thicker. What happened next would leave a lasting impact not only on those present, but also on the entire state. As the man in the crowd shouted, "That's the governor, that's Sarah Thompson," the atmosphere at the airport shifted dramatically. The officers, who had been so certain of their actions just moments earlier, suddenly looked like deer caught in headlights. Passengers began to murmur louder, some stepping closer to get a better look. A few gasped audibly when they realized the woman in handcuffs was indeed the state's governor. For Governor Thompson, the situation was surreal. She stood there, her hands still cuffed behind her back, watching as confusion and panic washed over the faces of the two officers. The taller officer, whose name tag read Officer Carter, finally loosened his grip on her arm. His partner, Officer Daniels, fumbled with the radio clipped to his shoulder, trying to call for backup or guidance. But his hands were shaking so badly that he could barely press the buttons. Meanwhile, the crowd continued to grow. People started recording videos on their phones, capturing every detail of the unfolding drama. Some shouted questions at the officers. Why did you arrest her? Do you even know who she is? Others simply stared in disbelief, shaking their heads. Governor Thompson, though furious, remained eerily calm. She knew losing her temper wouldn't help the situation. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the officers, her expression unreadable. Her silence seemed to unnerve them even more. Finally, Officer Carter managed to stammer. "Ma'am, you thought wrong," she interrupted, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Though quiet, it carried an authority that silenced the entire terminal. Everyone turned to look at her, including the officers. "You didn't bother to verify my identity properly. You ignored my protests. And now, thanks to your incompetence, you've made a spectacle of yourselves and me, in front of everyone here." Her words hit hard. Both officers flinched visibly, their earlier bravado completely gone. Officer Daniels finally found the courage to speak. "We're sorry, ma'am," he said hastily, his voice trembling. "It was a mistake. We'll fix this right away." With that, he reached for the keys to unlock the handcuffs. As soon as the metal fell away from her wrists, Governor Thompson rubbed them absently, wincing slightly. The cuffs had left red marks, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional toll of what had just happened. But the ordeal wasn't over yet. The crowd, now fully aware of who she was, began to react more strongly. A young woman holding a toddler stepped forward. "This isn't just a mistake," she said loudly, her voice quivering with emotion. "This is racism. If she weren't black, you wouldn't have treated her like this." Her words sparked murmurs of agreement throughout the terminal. Others chimed in, sharing their own stories of being profiled or mistreated by law enforcement. One elderly man recounted how he'd been stopped multiple times while driving, despite having done nothing wrong. A college student described being followed around a store simply because of the color of her skin. Each story added fuel to the growing fire of outrage. Governor Thompson listened intently, nodding occasionally. She appreciated the support, but also felt a deep sadness. These were the very issues she had been working tirelessly to address. Yet here she was, standing as living proof that the system was still broken. Turning back to the officers, she spoke again, her tone measured but firm. "What happened today isn't just about me. It's about every person who has ever been judged based on their appearance rather than their character. It's about the countless individuals who don't have the privilege I do, the privilege of being heard when something like this happens." Her words resonated deeply with those around her. Many nodded in agreement, while others wiped tears from their eyes. Even the officers seemed affected, though they remained silent, unable to meet her gaze. Officer Carter shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with shame. Officer Daniels, meanwhile, kept glancing at the growing crowd, clearly overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. Realizing that the incident was spiraling out of control, one of the airport security supervisors arrived on the scene. He introduced himself as Mr. Alvarez and immediately apologized to Governor Thompson on behalf of the facility. "Ma'am, please accept our sincerest apologies," he said, bowing his head slightly. "This should never have happened. We'll ensure that these officers are held accountable." Governor Thompson acknowledged his apology with a slight nod but didn't soften her stance. "Accountability is important," she replied, "but accountability alone won't fix the root of the problem. This isn't just about two officers making a bad decision. It's about the biases and systemic flaws that allowed this to happen in the first place." Her statement drew more cheers from the crowd. Someone shouted, "Tell him, Governor," while another person clapped enthusiastically. The energy in the terminal was electric, a mix of anger, frustration, and hope. People were rallying behind Governor Thompson, seeing her not just as a victim of injustice but as a symbol of resilience and determination. Meanwhile, the officers were visibly crumbling under the pressure. Officer Carter dropped to one knee, his head bowed low. "Please forgive us, Governor," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We didn't mean to cause any harm. We were just doing our job." His partner quickly followed suit, kneeling beside him. Together they looked up at her with wide, desperate eyes, begging for mercy. The sight was jarring. Just minutes ago they had been confident and authoritative, convinced they were in the right. Now, they were reduced to begging for forgiveness in front of a crowd that showed no sympathy for their plight. Governor Thompson studied them silently for a moment. Part of her wanted to lash out, to make them feel the same humiliation she had experienced, but she knew that wouldn't solve anything. Revenge wasn't the answer. What mattered most was using this moment to drive change, to turn a personal tragedy into an opportunity for progress. "I'm not the one you need to apologize to," she said finally, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "You need to apologize to every person you've ever judged unfairly, to every person who has ever been treated like a criminal simply because of how they look. Until you understand that, your apologies mean nothing." Her words hung heavy in the air, leaving the officers speechless. They remained on their knees, their heads lowered in defeat. Around them, the crowd buzzed with conversation, debating what should happen next. Some demanded immediate consequences for the officers, while others urged patience, insisting that justice must be served fairly. Amidst the chaos, Governor Thompson took a step back, allowing herself a moment to process everything that had transpired. She knew this was only the beginning. The video footage captured by bystanders would undoubtedly go viral, sparking nationwide conversations about race, policing, and accountability. And while she couldn't undo what had happened to her, she could use her platform to push for meaningful reforms. As she stood there, surrounded by supporters and critics alike, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This painful experience would become a catalyst for change, not just in her state, but across the country. The moments following Governor Thompson's powerful words were charged with an almost unbearable tension. The two officers remained on their knees, their heads bowed in shame as the crowd continued to buzz around them. Some people shouted angrily, demanding justice for what they saw as a blatant act of racial profiling. Others quietly filmed the scene, capturing every detail to share online. The air was thick with emotion, anger, frustration, disbelief, but also a flicker of hope. For many, this was more than just a personal affront to Governor Thompson. It was a chance to shine a spotlight on issues that had long been ignored. Governor Thompson took a deep breath, her mind racing. She knew this incident wasn't about punishing two individuals. It was about exposing the cracks in the system that allowed such behavior to happen in the first place. Still, she couldn't ignore the raw emotions swirling around her. Turning to Mr. Alvarez, the airport supervisor who had stepped in earlier, she asked firmly, "What are you going to do about this?" Mr. Alvarez hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the gravity of the situation. His initial apology had been sincere, but now he realized the enormity of the task ahead. "We'll launch an internal investigation immediately," he promised, his voice trembling slightly under the weight of public scrutiny. "These officers will be suspended pending further review. We'll also conduct mandatory training sessions on cultural sensitivity and proper identification protocols." While Governor Thompson appreciated his efforts to address the issue, she wasn't satisfied. "Training is important," she said, her tone firm yet measured, "but it's not enough. This isn't just about improving procedures, it's about changing mindsets. You can't fix systemic racism with workshops alone." Her statement drew murmurs of agreement from the crowd. People nodded, clapping softly to show their support. One woman holding a sign that read "Justice for All" stepped forward and handed it to Governor Thompson. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense meaning. Accepting the sign, Governor Thompson held it up for everyone to see, using it as a symbol of the larger fight ahead. Meanwhile, the officers remained on their knees, their faces pale with fear and regret. Officer Carter finally mustered the courage to speak again. "Governor Thompson, we didn't mean to hurt anyone," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we were doing our job. We made a terrible mistake and we're sorry." His partner, Officer Daniels, chimed in, tears streaming down his face. "Please believe us when we say we're not bad people. We're trying to learn. We want to do better." For a moment, the terminal fell silent. Everyone waited to hear how Governor Thompson would respond. Would she accept their apology? Or would she demand stricter consequences? After a pause, she spoke, her voice calm, but resolute. "I believe you when you say you didn't intend to cause harm," she began. "But intentions don't erase impact. What you did today caused real pain, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of their race. Saying, 'I'm sorry,' isn't enough. You have to prove it through your actions." Her words struck a chord with the crowd. Many nodded in agreement while others cheered loudly. Someone yelled, "That's right." Another added, "Make them accountable." The energy in the room shifted slightly, less hostile, more hopeful, as people began to focus on solutions rather than punishment. Recognizing the need to de-escalate the situation, Governor Thompson turned to the officers once more. "Get up," she instructed, her tone softening slightly. "Kneeling here won't solve anything. If you truly want to make amends, you'll work harder to understand the communities you serve. You'll listen to their stories, acknowledge their struggles, and commit to being part of the solution." Reluctantly, the officers rose to their feet, their expressions a mix of relief and apprehension. They knew they had narrowly avoided a full-blown disaster, but they also understood that this was far from over. Their careers and reputations were hanging by a thread. As the immediate crisis began to subside, Governor Thompson addressed the crowd directly. Standing tall despite the emotional toll of the day, she thanked everyone for their support and solidarity. "This moment belongs to all of us," she declared, her voice steady and clear. "It's a reminder that no one is above accountability, not even those sworn to protect us. But it's also a call to action. We can't let this incident fade into memory without demanding real change." Her speech ignited a wave of applause, with some people chanting her name. The atmosphere transformed from anger and frustration to determination and unity. Strangers embraced, exchanging phone numbers and social media handles to stay connected. A group of college students began organizing a march to the state capitol, vowing to keep the momentum alive. Even airport staff joined in, offering free coffee and snacks to protesters planning to stick around. Back at the center of it all, Governor Thompson felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. On one hand, she was heartened by the outpouring of support and the collective desire for justice. On the other, she couldn't shake the feeling that none of this should have happened in the first place. As she stood there, surrounded by cameras, and cheering voices, she reminded herself why she had entered politics in the first place: to create a world where no one had to endure what she had just experienced. Later that evening, news outlets across the country picked up the story. Footage of the incident spread like wildfire on social media, sparking heated debates about policing, racial bias, and accountability. Hashtags like #Justice for Thompson and #End Racial Profiling trended nationwide, drawing attention from activists, lawmakers, and celebrities alike. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters in major cities, calling for reforms and greater transparency within law enforcement agencies. In response to the growing backlash, the police department issued a formal apology, acknowledging the officers' misconduct and promising swift action. Both men were placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, and their case became a focal point for discussions about racial bias in training programs. Meanwhile, Governor Thompson returned home to find her phone flooded with messages of support from constituents, colleagues, and even national leaders. Some praised her grace under pressure, while others commended her ability to turn a deeply personal ordeal into a rallying cry for justice. Despite the whirlwind of attention, Governor Thompson remained focused on the bigger picture. She called an emergency meeting with her cabinet to discuss potential policy changes aimed at addressing systemic racism within law enforcement. Among the proposals were mandatory body cameras for all officers, independent oversight boards to investigate complaints of misconduct, and stricter penalties for acts of racial profiling. She also announced plans to host town hall meetings across the state, inviting residents to share their experiences and ideas for reform. By the end of the week, the incident had become a catalyst for change, not just in her state, but across the nation. Lawmakers introduced new legislation inspired by Governor Thompson's advocacy, and community organizations launched initiatives to educate the public about racial bias and its impact. While the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, there was a palpable sense of optimism in the air. People believed that something meaningful could come out of this painful chapter, a belief fueled by Governor Thompson's unwavering determination to turn tragedy into triumph. For Governor Thompson, the experience reinforced her commitment to fighting for equality and justice. Though the scars of that day would linger, both physically and emotionally, she refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, she channeled her pain into purpose, vowing to honor those who had suffered similar injustices by ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had. In doing so, she proved that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge, if we're willing to fight for it. In the days following the incident at the airport, Governor Sarah Thompson found herself thrust into the national spotlight. News outlets couldn't get enough of her story, how a high-ranking government official had been mistreated by the very system she was working to reform. The footage of the officers kneeling before her became iconic, symbolizing both the deep flaws in law enforcement and the power of accountability. For many, it was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that no one, regardless of their position or influence, was immune to racial bias. Governor Thompson wasted no time capitalizing on the moment. She knew that public attention could be fleeting, so she worked tirelessly to channel the outrage into tangible change. Within 48 hours of the incident, she held a press conference at the state capitol, addressing not only the specifics of what had happened, but also outlining her vision for systemic reform. Standing behind a podium adorned with the state seal, she spoke with clarity and conviction, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions still swirling inside her. "This is not just about me," she began, looking directly into the cameras. "It's about every person who has ever been judged based on the color of their skin, rather than the content of their character. It's about the countless individuals who don't have a platform to speak out when they're wronged. And it's about holding institutions accountable, not just today, but every day moving forward." Her speech laid out a comprehensive plan for reform, which included several key initiatives. First, she announced the introduction of legislation requiring all police officers in the state to wear body cameras at all times while on duty. These cameras would be equipped with automatic recording features to ensure transparency and prevent tampering. Second, she proposed the creation of an independent oversight board, composed of community members, legal experts, and civil rights advocates. This board would have the authority to investigate complaints against law enforcement officers and recommend disciplinary actions if misconduct was found. Third, Governor Thompson called for sweeping changes to police training programs. She emphasized that simply teaching officers how to handle firearms or make arrests wasn't enough. They needed to be trained in cultural sensitivity, conflict resolution, and de-escalation techniques. We can't expect officers to treat everyone fairly if we don't teach them how to see beyond stereotypes, she explained. Training isn't just about skills, it's about mindset. Finally, she unveiled plans to establish a statewide database tracking incidents of racial profiling and excessive force. This database would be accessible to the public, ensuring transparency and allowing citizens to hold law enforcement agencies accountable. By making data readily available, Governor Thompson hoped to foster trust between communities and police departments, a trust that had been eroded over decades of neglect and injustice. The response to her proposals was overwhelmingly positive. Activists praised her boldness, calling her a true champion for justice. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle expressed cautious optimism, acknowledging the need for reform while urging careful consideration of costs and logistics. Even some law enforcement leaders, initially resistant to change, admitted that the current system was broken and welcomed the opportunity to rebuild trust with the communities they served. But not everyone was supportive. Critics argued that Governor Thompson's reforms were too ambitious, warning that implementing such sweeping changes could strain already tight budgets. Others accused her of using the incident for political gain, suggesting that she was grandstanding to boost her approval ratings ahead of the next election. Social media platforms buzzed with heated debates as supporters defended her integrity while detractors questioned her motives. Despite the backlash, Governor Thompson remained undeterred. She understood that meaningful progress often came with resistance, and she was prepared to face it head-on. To build broader support for her initiatives, she embarked on a statewide listening tour, visiting towns and cities to hear directly from residents about their experiences with law enforcement. In each location, she hosted town hall meetings, where people were invited to share their stories, both good and bad, about interactions with police officers. These events were eye-opening. In rural areas, farmers and small business owners voiced concerns about being overlooked by urban-centric policies. In inner-city neighborhoods, parents recounted harrowing tales of their children being stopped and searched without cause. Young activists demanded more radical solutions, such as defunding the police and reallocating resources to social services. Each perspective added depth to Governor Thompson's understanding of the issue, reinforcing her belief that there was no one-size-fits-all solution. One particularly memorable town hall took place in a predominantly black neighborhood in the IA, state's largest city. As Governor Thompson listened intently, a young woman named Maya stood up to speak. Her voice trembled with emotion as she described how her brother had been fatally shot by police during a routine traffic stop 2 years earlier. He didn't deserve to die, she said, tears streaming down her face. And neither did anyone else who looks like him. Your reforms are a start, Governor, but they're not enough. We need real justice, not just policy changes. The room erupted in applause, with many nodding in agreement. Governor Thompson thanked Maya for her courage and promised to keep pushing for deeper reforms. Later that evening, as she reviewed notes from the meeting, she realized that this fight wasn't just about laws and regulations. It was about healing wounds that had festered for generations. Achieving true justice would require not only structural changes but also a fundamental shift in how society viewed race and power. As the weeks turned into months, Governor Thompson's efforts began to bear fruit. The legislature passed her body camera bill unanimously, marking a significant victory for transparency. The Independent Oversight Board was established shortly thereafter, with applications pouring in from qualified candidates eager to serve. Police departments across the state revised their training curricula, incorporating modules on implicit bias and community engagement. And the statewide database went live, providing citizens with unprecedented access to information about law enforcement practices. Perhaps most importantly, the incident sparked a broader cultural shift. Conversations about race and policing became more common, breaking down barriers that had long prevented honest dialogue. Schools incorporated lessons on systemic racism into their curricula, helping younger generations understand the roots of inequality. Businesses pledged to diversify their workforces and eliminate discriminatory hiring practices. Even local sports teams joined the movement, dedicating games to raising awareness about social justice issues. For Governor Thompson, these developments were bittersweet. On one hand, she was proud of the progress being made. On the other, she couldn't help but feel frustrated by how much work still lay ahead. Systemic racism wasn't something that could be eradicated overnight. It was a deeply entrenched problem that required sustained effort and vigilance. Still, she refused to let cynicism take hold. Every small victory mattered, and every life touched by her reforms gave her renewed hope. By year's end, the state saw a noticeable decline in complaints against police officers. Officers reported feeling more confident in their ability to connect with diverse communities, thanks to improved training and clearer guidelines. Residents, too, expressed greater satisfaction with law enforcement, citing increased professionalism and accountability. While challenges remained, there was a growing sense that things were moving in the right direction. Looking back on everything that had transpired, Governor Thompson reflected on the lessons she had learned. The incident at the airport had been painful, humiliating even, but it had also been transformative. It had reminded her of the importance of empathy, the need to listen, to learn, and to lead with compassion. Most of all, it had reinforced her belief that change was possible, but only if people were willing to confront uncomfortable truths and work together toward a better future. As she sat in her office late one evening, drafting remarks for an upcoming speech, she allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like stars against the night sky. Somewhere out there, someone was dreaming of a world free from prejudice and fear. And though the journey was far from over, Governor Thompson knew she was doing everything in her power to make that dream a reality. Months had passed since the incident at the airport, and Governor Sarah Thompson's life had transformed in ways she could never have anticipated. The public scrutiny, the emotional toll, and the relentless demands of her advocacy work had tested her resolve, but they had also deepened her commitment to justice. What began as a personal ordeal had evolved into a statewide movement, one that was slowly spreading its influence across the nation. For Governor Thompson, this wasn't just about fixing broken systems. It was about healing fractured relationships and building bridges between communities and law enforcement. The two officers involved in the incident, Officer Carter and Officer Daniels, had resigned shortly after their suspension. Their case became a cautionary tale, discussed in training sessions for new recruits as an example of how biases, unchecked and unaddressed, could lead to catastrophic mistakes. Both men issued public apologies through their lawyer, expressing regret for their actions and acknowledging the harm they had caused. While some viewed their resignations as a step toward accountability, others argued that simply walking away from their careers wasn't enough. They need to face consequences, one activist said during a televised debate. Otherwise, what message does that send? Governor Thompson chose not to dwell on their fate. She understood that punishing individuals wouldn't dismantle systemic racism. It required addressing the root causes. Instead, she focused her energy on ensuring that lessons were learned and implemented broadly. She often visited police academies to speak directly with cadets, sharing her story and emphasizing the importance of empathy, humility, and respect. Her presence left a lasting impression on many young officers in training, who saw her not as an adversary but as a partner in creating safer, more equitable communities. One such cadet, a young woman named Elena Morales, approached Governor Thompson after a speech at a local academy. "Thank you for coming here," Elena said nervously, clutching her notebook tightly. "I've always wanted to be a cop because I believe in protecting people, but sometimes I worry I won't know how to handle situations fairly." Governor Thompson smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on Elena's shoulder. "It's okay to feel uncertain," she replied. What matters is that you're willing to learn and grow. Being a good officer isn't about being perfect. It's about striving to do better every day. Elena nodded, visibly moved by the governor's words. Moments like these reminded Governor Thompson why she kept pushing forward, even when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. As reforms took hold, the state began to see tangible improvements. Complaints against police officers dropped significantly, thanks to increased oversight and transparency measures. Body camera footage provided crucial evidence in investigations, helping to exonerate both civilians and officers when misunderstandings arose. Community members reported feeling safer, knowing that there were mechanisms in place to address misconduct. Even skeptical residents who had once distrusted law enforcement admitted that things seemed different now. Better, though still imperfect. But Governor Thompson knew better than anyone that progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when old habits resurfaced or resistance flared up. In one rural county, sheriff's deputies refused to comply with the body camera mandate, claiming it infringed on their privacy rights. When pressed further, they argued that rural policing was fundamentally different from urban policing and shouldn't be subject to the same rules. The controversy reignited debates about whether statewide policies should account for regional differences, a challenge Governor Thompson hadn't fully anticipated. To address these concerns, she organized roundtable discussions with law enforcement leaders from various regions. These meetings weren't easy, tensions ran high and tempers occasionally flared, but they fostered dialogue and mutual understanding. By listening to the unique challenges faced by rural departments, Governor Thompson was able to adapt certain aspects of her reforms without compromising core principles. For instance, she allowed smaller agencies additional time to implement body cameras, provided they demonstrated a clear plan for compliance within a year. Her willingness to collaborate earned her respect from unexpected quarters. Sheriff Mike Reynolds, a staunch critic of the reforms initially, publicly praised Governor Thompson for her openness to feedback. "She didn't come in guns blazing, telling us what to do," he told a local newspaper. "She listened, really. Listened and worked with us to find solutions that made sense for everyone. That takes guts and grace." While professional accolades were gratifying, Governor Thompson found deeper fulfillment in the stories of ordinary citizens whose lives had been touched by the changes. One letter, written by a single mother named Lisa Johnson, stood out among the dozens she received each week. Lisa described how her teenage son, Jamal, had been stopped by police while walking home from school. In the past, such encounters would have ended in handcuffs and humiliation, but this time the officer introduced himself politely, explained why he had pulled Jamal over, and let him go without incident. "For the first time, I feel like my son can walk outside without fearing for his life," Lisa wrote. "Thank you for making that possible." Reading letters like Lisa's reminded Governor Thompson of the human impact behind the statistics and headlines. It reinforced her belief that the fight for justice wasn't abstract. It was deeply personal, rooted in the everyday experiences of real people. Every success story fueled her determination to keep going, even when the road ahead seemed impossibly long. By the end of the year, Governor Thompson's efforts had garnered national attention. She was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and community events across the country, sharing her vision for a fairer, more compassionate society. Her speeches resonated with audiences of all backgrounds, inspiring them to take action in their own communities. Activists credited her leadership with sparking a wave of similar reforms in other states, proving that grassroots movements could drive meaningful change. Yet despite the accolades and achievements, Governor Thompson remained humble. In interviews, she consistently redirected praise to the countless individuals who had supported her along the way. The activists, the lawmakers, the community leaders, and most importantly, the victims of injustice who had courageously shared their stories. "This isn't my victory," she often said. It belongs to everyone who has ever dared to hope for a better world." Privately, however, she acknowledged the toll the journey had taken on her. Late nights spent drafting legislation, endless hours traveling to meet constituents, and the constant pressure to balance politics with principle had left her physically and emotionally drained. Some days she questioned whether she was doing enough. or if true equality was even achievable. But then she would remember moments like the town hall meeting where Maya spoke about her brother, or the handshake with Sheriff Reynolds, or the smile on Elena's face, and she would remind herself why she kept fighting. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks lit up the sky over the state capitol, Governor Thompson stood on the balcony of her home, reflecting on the year that had passed. Beside her sat her dog, Max, wagging his tail contentedly. She thought about the people she had met, the challenges she had overcome, and the dreams she still carried in her heart. The road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, filled with obstacles and uncertainties. But for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful, not because everything was perfect, but because so many people were working together to make it better. As the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of a new year, Governor Thompson made a silent promise to herself: to continue leading with integrity, to listen without judgment, and to never stop believing in the power of collective action. The scars of the past would always remain, serving as reminders of the work yet to be done. But they would also stand as testaments to resilience, courage, and the enduring spirit of those who refused to give up. In the distance, the city buzzed with celebration, a symphony of laughter, music, and cheers. Somewhere in that sea of joy, someone was dreaming of a brighter future, a future shaped by the hard-fought victories of today. And though the journey was far from over, Governor Thompson knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Standing, strong, speaking truth, and lighting the path toward justice for generations to come.